The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's Mailers Hub webinar. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're talking about the rest of the world and looking at international mail in 2021. We'll start the session in about 90 seconds or so once everybody gets into their seats. So I'll be back to you shortly. Just stay tuned and we'll start shortly. Thanks. Okay, well, good afternoon again to everybody here on the line. Thank you again for tuning in today to our March Mailers Hub webinar. As I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be talking about something different. We're going to be covering international mail. And in that regard, we're going to have one of our expert consultants who will be, he'll be speaking to us today. Mary Law is the president of Worldview LLC and is a consultant with organizations on international addressing and databases and on postal and delivery issues, and just helps Mailers Hub figure out what's going on beyond the 48 to 50 states. She's editor of the Authoritative Guide to a Worldwide Postal Code and Address Formats, and author of Best Practices for International Mailings. She frequently writes and speaks on international addressing and mailing issues. Mary is a member of U.S. International Postal and Delivery Services Federal Advisory Committee and the Postal Services Mailers Technical Advisory Committee, MTAC, and participates with the Universal Postal Union Addressing Working Group. So she's clearly a qualified person to talk about this today, and we welcome her and her presentation. So Mary, if you would be so kind as to open up your mic and take over the session for today.
Thanks, Leo, and hello, everyone. There we go. There's our agenda for today. We're going to be going through topics. Obviously, there's a lot of different stuff to what we'd be talking about domestically. And just so there's no confusion, questions are welcome at any point, and we'll pause for questions after each topic, just so that we can make sure that there aren't any misunderstandings as we move forward. Next slide, please. So we all know COVID is continuing. There are still shutdowns and country closings to both mail and and stay-at-home orders. Some countries are extremely shut down. This has led to a lack of airlift. No flights means there's no cargo. That's led to higher prices, so it's costing more for USPS to send international mail, and it's taking longer. Moving forward, transport is going to cost more. It's not going to come back down. We're going to see more and more increases in transportation costs. And this is applying to all modes and to domestic traffic as well. Yes, I do listen to those boring things where the logistics people talk about projections for the future. And no, I don't care about trains particularly, but they include it and I listen. And because of the pandemic, we've had less inbound and outbound mail, which means less international income to USPS. So there's less volume. And why is that happening? We don't really know. It's not possible at this point to distinguish the effect of the pandemic from the increase in packages that happened starting about a year and a half ago. So next slide, and we'll go on to customs and VAT. Customs duty is a fee for importing an item. De minimis charges are the minimum value of the package where they start to charge it. So in the United States, in general, you can import anything worth less than $800 and not have to pay any customs duty. So $800 is the de minimis in the United States. Duty can be done in two ways. It can be either DDP, paid in advance by the sender, or it can be DDU, which is paid on arrival, usually by the addressee. Postal mail is, in almost every case, DDU. So the recipient of the package pays the duty, and occasionally they're surprised by it. And that's not a good thing, as we all know. So in addition to duty, there are various taxes. VAT is value added tax, GST is goods and services tax. There are a couple other acronyms for those kind of taxes on sales, but these are the two that you'll see most often. Increasingly, countries are saying, we want you to pay us that VAT or GST. It's like the states here imposing sales tax on items coming in from another state. They're doing it, as far as I can tell, primarily to protect the local business, the brick and mortar businesses, and also because they're losing all that revenue. The problem is, of course, that internationally, you've got over 200 countries and territories, so it's kind of difficult to track what's going on with that. We'll talk about a couple specifics that you should take a look at. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about Brexit. At the end of 2020, the UK withdrew from the EU. It looked for a long time like there was going to be no agreement, but they came to basically an 11th hour agreement. Nobody really liked it. Nobody really hated it. So it went through. The big effect for Americans is that it affects all customs entry points in the UK and every EU country. And there have been disruptions to supply chains and logistics networks. So it's taking longer for things to clear through customs when they have to. And even for items that aren't clearing customs, there's a jam at the entry points because of that. Now, there was, right around Christmas time, a huge backup of more than 300 large trucks going into the British ports to exit Britain to France. It's where the Channel Tunnel goes. It's where some of the ferries go. So you had this huge backup because France closed the borders. They did it because of COVID, because of a large COVID outbreak. So all of a sudden you had this, it was 300 trucks. I have no idea how many miles that would be. It created both a public health crisis as well as just a logistics nightmare. Public health crisis is the drivers had no food or water because they were expecting to get off a ferry on the other end before the end of the day. And there were no sanitation facilities for them. That got cleared up, but it also got a lot of companies, both in the UK and in the EU, to say, okay, we're going to do a moratorium on sending goods across the border for a while. That moratorium is mostly ended, but we still haven't gotten up to the level of goods that were being sent cross-border before that mess. So we had the mess because of COVID, followed by Brexit. And one logistics provider, DPD, which is owned by La Poste, they're a regional equivalent to FedEx, stopped moving things between the UK and the EU and vice versa, because they were saying that 35% of the stuff was coming back as not being able, they couldn't process it with the new regulations. the forms were incorrect. We're going to be seeing an increasing difference between the regulations and standards between the EU and the UK. They have been aligned completely. They've already made some changes. They are no longer completely aligned. One of the things they're not aligned on is the UK is right now charging 20% value, 20% on items valued at more than a British penny. And this is payable monthly or quarterly. Now that amount, that 20% might vary depending on the types of goods. There is a registration requirement with this. I will say before you go looking at how to register, you need to have a discussion with senior management, because the registration requires legal details of how you're organized and exactly what you do in very legalistic terms. So this isn't something that you can fill out easily. Now, they're also charging duty at this point in the UK on any shipments that are valued more than 135 pounds. So 135 pounds is that de minimis. If you look up duty charges or customs charges, knowing the term de minimis is very helpful. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Hey, Mary, before we get off that, I was, if you're a domestic mail producer and you have a customer who wants to ship, like annually, they'll send out nice calendars, desk calendars to their clients. And if some of these clients, because it's global economy now, if some of these clients are in England or in Germany, how does the experience you were just reporting affect them?
There's an exemption from customs duty for gifts, and those would come under the gifts. I'm talking very, very generally here, because if it's an extremely expensive gift, there's going to be duty on it. You really have to look at the specific country, because some countries are being much more generous than others, but you would need to put a customs form on each of those items.
And if the shipper, if it was going through the mail, all right, and I'll use it in the broadest term,
Yeah.
could it possibly be going through an intermediary country like Great Britain and then getting hung up as it's trying to continue its distribution into Europe?
No, that's some good news in all this.
Oh, thank you. I was hoping we'd find some.
You pay customs duty at the final destination, where it's actually entering into, quote, the marketplace. So if they transship through the UK and the UK doesn't do anything with them except move them forward, there's no tax or duty in the UK. You would pay it at the final destination points.
So the intermediary is almost just transparent.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right, well, thank you for that. Okay, my interruption is over. Thanks.
It's a good question. I mean, the problem is going to be if some of these rules are so new that things are getting hung up while people ask questions. That's the big issue. At the end, I'll make some recommendations after we get through the rest of this. So let's move on to the EU, which is also changing things. The EU, the way the EU works, there are 27 countries in the EU. The EU implements a directive, and then each country passes that directive into local laws. So you've got 27 different legal versions of the same thing, each with their own different, bells and whistles and nuances. So Germany and Greece can be implementing the same EU directive, but there will be differences in the laws locally. It's not fun. Normally, you don't get caught with it. Normally, you can depend that the EU directive is in general what's being done. But if you do a lot of traffic with one or two countries, you need to take a look at their particular laws. So we had some customs processing changes that took effect yesterday. These are in effect, this is the ICS 2, and that's the Import Control System version 2. It's very much their version of, I'd say a combination of their version of AED and the STOP Act combined, and we'll look at that a little bit more closely as we go forward. On July 1st, there will be new VAT rules taking effect. So, remember I said that there would be differences between the UK and the EU? In the EU, the tax applies on anything that has more than €1, has a value of more than €1 on business to consumer goods. There are rules for business to business goods. They vary too much for me to put on one slide, but I have supplied some links here. So if you need to look up a particular country, you can look them up at those lovely long links, which you may have to copy and paste. I try to make them live. I'm never sure I'm successful. And again, registration is required. If you register within any country in the EU, you are registered in all countries in the EU. Remember that the Republic of Ireland is a member of the EU and it is English speaking. So you can get the English version from Ireland. However, because of those minor differences in the laws in the different countries, you again need to talk to your attorneys and accountants. I hate to tell you that, but we all think it's such fun to do that.
And Mary, the links are live in the handout.
Oh, okay, that's great, because they're very lengthy and I hate typing them when I have that long a link. So let's move on to customs and forms and the shipping services file, which is the next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. As the US wants more AED, so do other countries. You may see the term EAD. They're the same thing, they just transposed. So instead of saying advanced electronic data, they're saying electronic advanced data. And we have these new procedures as of yesterday. Is this going to require additional items on the USPS customs form and in the SSF file? It's unclear. It now depends on the recipient country. There are optional items. My own recommendation is that you gather this information and you start putting it on the form, because if suddenly somebody decides to get really picky, you've taken care of it. So what you need is a phone number or an email for the recipient. You need a tax or an other ID number that varies depending on the country. Your recipient will know what number they're supposed to put on the form in most cases. They truly will, even though they'll tell you they don't. Because if they're ordering goods internationally, they understand the system at least somewhat in their own country. And then there is a harmonized tariff schedule code number, the HS code or number. That's the link to where to find them. They're not difficult to find. You'll find that you may need, even for a large e-tailer of something like clothing, you may only need 80 or so, even though you've got 10,000 items on your site. Because men's leather shoes are men's leather shoes, no matter what the design. So let's go on to why this is a concern, because this all looks pretty simple now. So the next slide, please, which I am not going to go over in detail. This is provided by Liam O'Sullivan, who's the COO of International Post Corporation, which is IPC. They're located in Belgium. They work with posts to help move things through the system more easily. This is Liam's diagram of how the new ICS2 will work. So up there in the left top corner, we have the origin post, which sends the customs data to the destination post, which then sends it to the destination customs authority. And then if there's any, if it can either come back as everything's fine, send us the package, or we have a question and you need to find out an answer to it. So then they send the question or the referral to the origin post. If it's a question, the origin post replies, and then we go back to the destination customs. Now, at the meantime, the origin post is supposed to be holding all these items until they get approval to send them. And all of this is supposed to happen, all of this back and forth and agreement and questioning and answering is supposed to happen in between 36 and 48 hours of when the origin post receives the customs data from the mailer. I don't know about anybody else, but I have a feeling that this is going to take more than 36 hours to go back and forth if there's a question. And in the meantime, the origin post is likely to send the items anyway because USPS just can't hold all international mail for 2 or 3 days while this back and forth goes on. And we're talking about a specific package, not a particular receptacle. So it's in the handout. You can look at it more closely, but I have doubts that it's going to go as smoothly as everyone thinks.
Now, Mary, because a lot of people still will think in domestic mail terms. This process you outlined, does it apply to what we would call letters and flats, or does it apply to just packages, and does it apply to all packages?
It applies to anything that needs a customs form or customs information. And at this point, about 85% of the US outbound traffic is packages. So only about 15% of our outbound is actually letters. So much of this information is about packages. The problem is that letters can get caught up in these delays. You know, if USPS is holding everything up, you know, huge numbers of packages, letters are going to just be stacked up behind them if they do a first in, first out. I know there is concern among the international people at USPS about this problem, that it could really cause trouble. IPC thinks it's going to work smoothly, is their public comment. A private comment from somebody who works at IPC, who I will not name, says it'll work fine with the efficient countries. It won't work so well with the less efficient ones. And remember, we've got 27 members of the EU. Does that answer it, Leo?
Yes, thank you.
I don't want to always be Debbie Downer here, but you look at this diagram and, you know, there's USPS sitting up there in that left upper corner with all these packages and all this stuff going back and forth between them and the destination post and the destination customs. And you kind of wonder, really, it's going to work that smoothly and quickly?
We're not dealing with a uniform, not opponent, but a uniform opposite number. in the 120 odd different countries with which the U.S. exchanges mail.
Yeah, but this only applies to at this point, this only applies to the 27 EU countries.
It's still not uniform.
It's still not uniform, but it's also, you have to realize that, some of those 27 countries are among our larger trading partners.
Right.
So we're not talking small volumes here. And this is a lot of detailed exchange information. And in some cases, when they go back with a question to the origin post, it's not going to be something the post can answer. It's going to have to be referred back to the mailer of record.
Yeah,
So
well, that's the next thing. Everybody, including us, depends upon the sophistication of the actual originator of the piece, the company, the mailer, what do you want to call them?
right. So, so in some cases for companies that are service providers that are mailing on behalf of others, they are then going to have to go back to the mail owner to get an answer. So, this becomes a much more complicated process than this already complicated looking diagram suggests. Like I said, I don't like being Debbie Downer. Every time I look at this, I think, okay. So let's go on and talk about costs, postage. First, a definition. There was a lot of stuff in the press and a lot of stuff in the air about terminal dues a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, I guess, when the U.S. was looking to possibly withdraw from the UPU. To some extent, yeah, I care what terminal dues are, but not really, because I don't pay terminal dues. I pay postage. Terminal dues are what USPS pays Canada Post, or Canada Post pays Royal Mail, or Deutsche Post pays La Post. Mailers pay postage. Of course, higher terminal dues mean higher postage, because it's one of the items that goes into that cost. That we hear so much about how they calculate and what they put into it or don't put into it, or we don't hear much about it. Everybody guesses what they do. So in July of 2020, 31 countries self-declared rates for small packages. This was an idea that the USPS put forward originally, or the US State Department, to be specific. At that point, there were substantial increases in USPS contract rates for international consolidators. They raised their rates in turn. There weren't as high, the over-the-counter rates did not change much. They changed later, and I expect them to continue to change in an upward direction. There were also increases of up to 100% in inbound to the US postage rates from some countries. So in July 2020, the USPS rate, they use this crazy SDR thing. Don't worry about it. I did it in American English. So they started charging $2.94.8 per item and about $1.84 per pound. Now you put that together and it quickly gets expensive. So the country sending the item to us has to cover that in their inbound postage. At the same time, we cover those rates, and I do have them for all countries. If anybody wants them, I'm happy to send them to you. You really don't want to read them unless this is something you're very specifically interested in. So in January 2021, 44 countries self-declared rates for small packages. The US also negotiated bilateral agreements with who knows how many countries, because that's competitive information and they do not disclose it. Bilateral agreements override the terminal dues rates. So for example, there's a bilateral agreement between Canada and the United States. I can say that very, very safely because there always has been for decades and decades. And the agreement between those two countries supersedes the UPU agreement. Now, the thing is, the reason that the terminal dues become important is because the terminal dues, in effect, create a base for negotiations. So countries aren't going to negotiate much off of their terminal dues rate unless the other country is willing to do the same. And the US traditionally has not been willing to do that. So there were higher TD rates across the board in UPU published documents. You can compare, here we are for the US. You can compare the increase, the July 2020 US rate with the January 2021 rate. You can see it's gone up enough that it would affect postage. So bottom line, higher postage for everybody. I don't see this changing. I think it's going to continue. And when I say everybody, if we can go to the next slide, which I will not read, these are the countries that self-declared rates in January 2021. As you can see, we're going everywhere from Bosnia and Herzegovina to the United States, to Italy, to Japan, to Croatia, to Uruguay. It really is a worldwide thing. And you'll notice the new ones and the increasing rates countries overwhelm the ones that have decreased. So again, we're going up. So let's look at international postage in 2021, which is the next slide. Okay, UPU small package rates in 2021, 13 countries declared for the first time. 19 countries increased, 8 countries decreased, 1 country remained the same, 3 countries changed, but the effect is unclear because of the way those formulas worked. USPS has been working on bilateral agreements with most of the major mailing partners. I've got a question mark because nobody knows who they've actually completed these with. USPS announced fairly recently, last month, at the beginning of February in the Federal Register, a new outbound commercial provider initiative program. And we will talk about that specifically in a minute. And there are lots of contributing factors to increases in international postage. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the domestic effect of the PRC rate authority might lead to the mid-year increase. It's likely they're going to look at a mid-year increase for international as well, and international package services are all competitive. I would also say, Leo, before you ask me about letters, there is some move with or some backing at USPS to request that the PRC make all international services competitive, letter and packages. I think we'd see incredible increases in postage rates if that happens. We've also got the increases in the UPU terminal dues rates, the unusually high transit costs because of the pandemic, and of course, the usual changes in other USPS costs, labor, goods, and services. And we know during the pandemic, all of those costs have gone up. So my own guess is that when we start looking at the competitive international prices, there's a lot of upward pressure. I should also say at this point, Leo can discuss this further if he wants to, but in his testimony before the Oversight Committee, the House Oversight Committee, PMG DeJoy said that he isn't fond of work share discounts. We may see some changes in that where, you know, the work share discounts go down. So that would put even more upward pressure on the cost to mailers for international goods.
I think the PMG tried to walk that back a little bit after everybody in the mailing business kind of said what, and their response was not positive to his comment. So, but of course we'll see. I don't think you can take apart something as ingrained as work sharing, despite his opinion.
No, but
Now, go ahead.
They've got a lot more leeway on international work share discounts than they do domestically.
Right. And that's the big difference. Now, just to put things in context here, the upward pressures we're seeing in the U.S. are those replicated pretty much in the other countries who are our major partners in exchanging mail?
There's some certainly the cost, the regulatory environment in different countries varies greatly. Everything from the post can pretty much do what it pleases as long as they don't anger the government. To it's even more closely regulated than in the U.S. The U.S. when they pushed for the self-declared rates and moved to, this is controversial. I'm going to say something that's my opinion. Others will disagree with me, and I certainly have had discussions with lots of people about this, so this is not the strongest statement you would hear. But the U.S. really did make a lot of their normal friendly allies at the UPU upset with their withdrawal threat. There was a feeling that the elephant in the room was stomping about. And so some countries have raised postage to the U.S. substantially more than they have to other countries. For example, there's a regulatory environment within the EU that keeps prices relatively stable among the EU countries internally. So those countries have raised the postage to the United States more than they've raised the postage to each other. You see the same thing with Japan and with Australia. Their postage to the US went up at a greater rate than it did to some other countries. I'm hesitant to say it was payback, but the USPS and the US State Department is really pushing at this point, and other countries are not necessarily appreciating that. That's as conservative as I can make that statement.
That's fine.
And still make it comprehensible. So are there any other questions? Or should we move to our last slide? Okay, on February 1st, the USPS published a notice of a new initiative for international package called the Outback Commercial Provider Initiative. It applies to a number of international services, and there are some that are specifically excluded. I've listed them on the slide. The concern about this is that there are new customs forms, shipping labels, and bag tags, and that a new specific designed commercial invoice would be required for each item that requires a customs label. and that there will be process changes and requirements related to this service at some destinations. You're talking about implementation on or about April 30th. The original on February 1st said on or about March 30th, 31st. They've changed that. That's not much time to get changes to software done, test them, train staff, inform clients, get clients to train their staff, you know, in all those ducks in a row. And what's not said is that this will eliminate the options that some groups of mailers, particularly small and medium-sized mailers, not the ones that are entering large quantities, can use. There's a question about whether or not delivery through this new service would be available to PO boxes or held, you know, holding for delivery. They've said that there may be some advantages to this. So my question is, well, could we get commercial customs clearance? Which means that you could pay duty as the sender. It complicates the service, so I'm not expecting it. I have put the link to the original one, and I agree that the USPS is looking to be able to enable service continuity where it's not. What my first above the bullet point to quote, unfavorable bilateral negotiations. USPS already looks like the elephant in the room to some of these people. That is going to make them look even worse. I don't think it's going to be the way to make people negotiate well with us. So we'll see what's happening. There's been a lot of opposition to this among the mailers. USPS says it's moving forward. We have no idea what countries they're looking at. And they have told us they will announce them at least 2 weeks before implementation. And might I say 2 weeks is not much time.
2 weeks is pretty soon too.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying that they'll announce the countries, you know, basically by April 15th. This new service applies to on April 30th. You know, I don't process a lot of mail. I talk to other people who process a lot of mail, and I have programmed a lot. I would be hard pressed to say 2 weeks is enough time to set this up.
Well, usually if you look at what happens when there's a domestic price change, the folks who do the software that's used by domestic mailers and shippers requires, I think, more than 2 weeks to be built, checked, and distributed and installed. So I don't know why that would be any different here, particularly if it's more complicated.
Well, software changes are software changes, you know, whether they affect one country or 10. You know, somebody needs time to do it. This is being discussed at the MTAC meeting the end of this month. We'll see what kind of response it gets there. There are some people that think that the USPS will pull back from this. There are other people who think that they're going to just go forward. I'll wait till after the MTAC meeting to have an opinion on that one.
Well, DraftKings now is letting people gamble online, so I think Vegas may post odds of what they're going to do.
I don't think they've quite started posting odds on USPS International.
It's an opportunity.
Well, you know, the bookmakers in the UK certainly post odds on things like that. In the UK, at least. So that's it. Any questions, comments? I'm, you know, happy to hear questions and comments in the last slide.
There you go.
Has my email. I do answer questions. I do not try to upsell you. I just try to answer the question that I raised.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody who's on the call today knows that if they've got questions, I mean, this is a lot to digest, especially if usually you speak domestic mail and not international mail. So if folks do have questions, Mary is one of our valued resources, and she will take your questions and help you out and
Yeah.
give you all the help you need in understanding all of this. So I would urge you to contact her and involve those in your respective outfits who may need particular help if they're the ones who are more closely involved in international mail situations.
And I would like to take a minute to say that, this is all about what USPS wants. There are pre-qualified wholesalers. There's a list on the USPS website. I will dig out the link if you want it. And these are companies that do international mail exclusively through the USPS. So you get US postage, but they do only international mail. And they pass on some portion of their work share discount to their clients. Why else would you use them? So a lot of this, and they're extraordinarily conversant with all of these rules and all of the bagging and tagging and all of that that's required. So I would encourage you, if you've got a small volume comparatively of international, that you look at the pre-qualified wholesalers list. Some of these will take single pieces, others want quantity. It's like you all on the domestic side, your requirements vary in what you will and won't take. But I would say in general that you should be aware that there are options other than doing it all yourself.
Well, at this point, I'm looking at our question box here in the chat box, and I think we're pretty well caught up on things. I'm sure folks have not had a lot of exposure to this, so that they get more and more involved, they'll be digging out some more questions to ask you. So if you do have questions, there's Mary's email address. Please contact her or send them to me, and I can forward them over to her as you prefer. But either way, I think it's been very helpful to get this information, and very useful for anybody who wants to send things internationally to be aware of this. I guess it's safe to say very dynamic situation, and probably one which could be very problematic for anybody who wanders into it without good information and good preparation. So to that extent, I think I want to thank all of our attendees today for paying attention, for calling in today, and I especially want to thank Mary for her valuable information. Anybody who wants to review this, if you're a subscriber, you can go back and pull down the recording within about 48 hours. That's when it should be rendered and available. And otherwise, there's the handout there for you to look at. As we said before, the links are live if you want to contact things. So with all that said, again, thank you to Michelle for keeping the lights on here, keep making sure that everything works. Thanks to our attendees, and thanks again to Mary for all this great information. And until we get to next month's webinar, which is on April, I forgot the date already, but we have our next Mailers Hub webinar next month. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody. Please stay safe and enjoy springtime. Bye.
Bye, everybody.